Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Killer Academy, where we take the worst killers Dead by Daylight has to offer and I show you how to best utilize them. On this episode we'll be taking a look at the Clown, one of the most interesting killers with a lot of potential playstyles. So I find that he's just kind of not good, and same with a lot of people. He has potential there, but overall his lack of actual helpful ability in that he doesn't have something that could, say, expose a survivor, greatly increases movement speed, things like that. He's not used often. So let's take a look at why. So, his ability is the Afterpiece Tonic. It's actually divided into two different abilities, the Afterpiece Tonic and the Afterpiece Antidote. So, the Afterpiece Tonic will slow movement speed of all survivors that it hits, and it produces a cloud that if they walk through it does the same thing. It impairs their vision, and it causes them to cough, which is really helpful for tracking them. The Afterpiece Antidote makes it to where it creates a gray gas cloud that turns yellow when it's ready. So when you walk through, or any survivor walks through, they gain big movement speed for 5 seconds. And it also cures the Afterpiece Tonic if a survivor walks through it. So he does have some things that he can use to change its playstyle a little bit, such as the Redhead's Pinky Finger, which makes it to where you get the exposed status when hitting a survivor, direct hitting only though, and the Tattoo's Middle Finger, which makes it to where you can see the auras of all survivors hit by either one of your tonics. He has some more things, some that increase bottle count, some that give more hindered, and one of my favorite is actually this one. It causes blindness, which can be really helpful. But overall, he's not that good. So let's take a look at his perks. Pop Goes the Weasel. Man, one of the best perks in the game on a killer that is not that good. We have quite a few of those over on this channel of very good perks on not so good killers. Basically, if you don't know what it does, after you hook a survivor you damage a generator, it instantly loses 25% progress. It's really helpful, and it makes it to where a gen breaking playstyle can be really good for anybody running this, as long as they're not running Ruin or Jolt. Colorophobia. Colorophobia makes it to where when a survivor is in your terror radius and healing, they heal slower. It's fine. It's actually decent if you pair it with Nurse's Calling, because then you'll both see where they are and make sure that they don't get any last-second heals off before you hit them. But it's nothing special. Bamboozle. This one's actually really good because after you vault a window, it blocks the window and you actually vault faster. So it looks like he shouldn't be that bad, but let's just take a further look. So Clown's two abilities boil down to making himself faster or making a survivor slower with reload time in between. So you have on base 4 bottles before you need to reload, meaning you have 4 chances to either slow the enemy or make yourself faster. It should be noted that this can be increased with add-ons, but also be noted that it takes a decent amount of time for your yellow bottle to become a yellow bottle. Otherwise, it is just a gray cloud on the ground that has no benefit of going through it. It should also be noted, however, that on certain maps that are indoor, the throwing projectile actually hits the ceiling, which can be a disadvantage if you need to throw it a distance. I found this especially troubling on Midwich, and Larry's, and even the game to an extent. But this can be bypassed by aiming slightly lower. However, you do have the disadvantage of not as much space you're able to throw. As for how to utilize the yellow bottles, I recommend throwing them a few feet in front of you when you're trying to clear the distance between a generator. This gives the bottle enough time to become yellow while also making it to where you're not going to just let a survivor get away, because there's not going to be a survivor around you when you use it. Also, use things like trees, ceilings on certain maps, or even hooks to your advantage. If you hit these, then the gas will actually flower out and have a larger radius of effect. This can be especially useful if you're playing against a survivor who knows how to dodge, because the falling gas will be extremely difficult to dodge away from because of the fact that it just goes over too massive of an area. Now, with all of this said, it should seem like he's a decent killer, but let's take a look at further into why he's just not. So his abilities are really only to bypass his weakness, being one of the slowest killers in the game at base, without the boost of his speed and yellow bottle. This is especially bad because he's really the only killer in the game that has his upside make up for his weakness that is unique to him. Think of it. No other killer's upside makes up for a weakness that's unique to them other than maybe Nurse, and even then, her upside is so big that when you get used to using her, most survivors, even really good survivors, won't know what to do against you. But with this killer, it's just kind of weird, because he's really easy to dodge at a lot of the points. His bottles travel incredibly slow, and it's hard to utilize him to his best, so let's try to take a look at how we do that more. So, I found the use of add-ons to be really helpful. There's an add-on that actually exposes the survivor when you direct hit them with the bottle, meaning that you can one-shot them. This is really helpful in general because it lets you get a leg up on one of your weaknesses, which is not having something that's extremely effective. So, I think most killers, to an extent, have what can be generously called an extremely unique ability. There are some that are kind of just copies of others, like Trickster to Huntress, but for the most part, they're extremely unique, and that goes over to this guy. But one of the things you can do to make this guy better is actually remove a layer of uniqueness. So when you equip that iridescent add-on, and you're able to become either a tracker or a one-shot menace, depending on which one you equip, it can be really helpful. As for the other add-ons, if you don't have any iridescence yet, I'd recommend the kerosene add-on. This is really useful because it actually inflicts the blindness effect, which stacks on top of the survivor's impaired vision when you hit them with this bottle normally. So this can be extremely helpful when you're dealing with survivors that are, good and able to loop you constantly. Because if they don't know where you are, then they won't be able to loop you as well. So I recommend equipping that if you don't have any others, or even if you do, because in general it's really useful. So let's take a look at some of the things we could change about this killer to make him more useful in general. Well, I don't know anything about his actual ability that you could change, but I do have some suggestions for add-ons. I think add-ons that make it to where if a survivor is hit in the cloud, to give them either the bleeding or the broken effect would be really helpful. These add-ons would ideally be either a purple or a green, because I don't think that they're worth iridescence, and I don't think that they're bad enough to be a yellow or a brown. So I think that because this killer specializes so much in status effects, be it the slowing, the blindness, everything about that, I think that if you were to make him have a wider variety of availability for status effects, that could be really helpful and give him different playstyles. I could think of a lot of times that having something like a broken status effect on a survivor could be really helpful, or having something like bleeding could be helpful, because unlike Lesion, this killer has an amount of range that he can use to his advantage. So, aside from making these add-ons that I suggested, and you could do more with other status effects in the game, and I could think that that would be especially helpful in making this guy a utility killer in general, I would suggest make it to where his projectile doesn't arc so much. You can keep the same distance and throwing speed, but I would just say, as it stands, it's really difficult to aim on indoor maps or maps with a lot of trees, because it hits the ceiling and trees more often than you'd expect it would, which is a big disadvantage. Think of Huntress. When you're throwing a hatchet, it goes in a mostly straight line, and of course it does lob and have an arcing projectile, but you're not throwing it 3 feet in the air before it comes back down, which makes her a good killer. But with this killer, he is absolutely crippled on any indoor maps because he just doesn't have the option of range, because of even if you're not looking up at all, it'll still hit the ceiling in most parts of the map. This is really bad, so I'd try to change that if it wouldn't be too much of a deal, and if it was, then you could always change it back. But as it stands, it's really hard to time your throws well and not just hit the ceiling. Now, time for some more strategies, since we got through that part of the video. Some strategies I'd recommend are throwing things over pallets and windows. Do anything to try to block, similar to Trapper, but unlike Trapper, you don't have to do it so far in the past that you might as well not do it at all. This is really helpful on maps like Larry's, where there are a lot of windows, because if you can even give them the smallest decrease in speed, you can make use of it really, really well. So keep that in mind. You can also do it with doorways, and it works really well, especially if there's one-shot doorways that they have to get through. And for this, I would recommend the status effect that gives them exposed, because this bottle, when you equip it, will actually do quite a bit, because if you know that they're going to have to be forced to go through a doorway, and you throw it while they're running, you can hit them with it, and then immediately be ready, because, well, now this person can get one shot, and you know where they're going, plus they're slowed on top of that. And you can pair this with having things that give the aura revealed of the survivor. This will be especially helpful if they're good at looping or juking in general, because I noticed that a lot of the times this killer is really, really bad for tracking most of the times. So being able to see where they are with the iridescent add-on that reveals all hindered survivors' auras is really helpful. It's also generally smart to throw a bottle at your feet when you're picking up survivors, because if they have Decisive Strike, when they get off your shoulder, they'll still actually be affected by the slowing and the coughing, as well as the impaired vision. And if you have anything else like the blindness effects, they'll also be affected by that. This can be really helpful if you have even the slightest suspicion that somebody might have Decisive Strike, and I'd recommend doing it on anytime you pick up a survivor that you know is going to be on their second or third hook. So I don't know what more we could do for this killer. He's pretty fun in general, but he does have his downsides, and his downsides are pretty big. The decreased movement speed makes it to where a lot of perks don't work well with him. So for perks, I'd recommend running Bamboozled, Noed, Dragon's Grip, and you can do some other stuff. I wish that the Blood Web would have just given me Discordance. Still don't know how to pronounce that, by the way, because I think that could pair really, really well with this perk. And I'm kind of sad that the Blood Web just decided to say, screw you, the entire time that I was maxing out this guy. It was pretty unfortunate. But until then, throw some fart gas in some people's face and tell them I sent ya.